A husband replaces his cheating wife's lube with poison ivy juice. Our first Reddit post is from Pinko. This story is about 12 years old. I told it to one of my co-workers yesterday, and he said I should share it to read it today. He again nudged me. So here we are, having drinks before the 4-day weekend, and my writing is complete. So first time here. And while in college, I met the woman who I thought was my one. We dated for about 2 years and had a big wedding. After a 10-month engagement, her family was pretty well-to-do in a small southern town. We were both continuing our educations, and I was also working to support us. I was pursuing a master's in engineering while she was finishing her doctorate in anthropology. Over the summer, an opportunity came up for her to make some extra money going as an aide on a religious studies trip to Jamaica. I didn't hesitate when she asked me about it. I mean, she was going to get to visit Jamaica and get paid for it. I saw no downside other than missing her being at home for 6 weeks. Little did I know at the time, but she had been passionately hugging the professor. He had hung out with us, smoked my weed, and drank my ing beer. I considered him a friend who arranged the trip for a couple of months, and it was a getaway for them to bang all over the island. I, clueless and happy, spent those weeks while she was gone, taking extra shifts so I could match what she made in our accounts and surprise her. What a moron, right? One of the students from the trip actually seeked me out to clue me in. I didn't believe him until I started looking for evidence on my own. I broke down and checked her texts while she was sleeping, and nothing was there. There were a few voicemails, so I decided to listen. And there it was, a message from that giant butthole, saying how exciting it was that I almost caught them. I opened up her laptop and hit the emails after that. It was piles and piles of this stuff, making fun of me for not knowing, hugging passionately in our bed and laughing about it. There was so much and I was so heartbroken still to her to take any action. I was lost. I had no idea what to do, so I sat on it for a couple of weeks and acted as normally as I could. I noticed everything now. I felt so stupid for not seeing it before. So many signs. One stuck out in particular. I noticed that our stash of homemade weed lube. If you've never tried it, I'd highly recommend giving it a go. It was going down even though we weren't hugging passionately. It was obvious they were also using the fruits of my labor to get off more effectively. This really pissed me off, like unreasonably so. Hulk effing mad. It finally all hit me. I was a freaking joke to these buttholes and they were using the lube I made and hugging passionately in my bed. I didn't hurt anymore, I just wanted to make them hurt. So while she was studying at the library, I made a new batch of lube. I put enough weed in it for it to smell like normal. But I also added some poison ivy from our backyard to the mixture, and after refilling the spray bottle we used for application, I waited. A few days go by, and I'm working extra so I can be out of the house more, and bam, bait taken. That night after she goes to sleep, my plan goes into action. I sneak her phone away and delete my contact while replacing his phone number in her contacts as mine. I go to bed but can't sleep because it feels like I'm 5. And tomorrow is Christmas. Dawn arrives and she's in the shower. I get a text. I'm super itchy. Are you okay now, Lord? Now is my time. I texted her back. Look, I thought it had cleared up, but I guess I had a flare-up. I'm sorry, but I've got herpes, and I guess you do now, too. I heard this girl squeak in the shower. I'm covering my mouth, nearly losing it. I went on to text her as the professor. Then it was time to end things. Now a new semester was about to start, and I kind of have a little crush on another Ta. I wanted her mad. This is a woman that never got told no, growing up, and never had to deal with rejection, let alone from a balding dude in his 50 seconds with herpes. When she got out of the shower, it was obvious she had been crying. But I could see that anger in her eyes. I could see how uncomfortable she was, squirming at the table drinking coffee and mulling the situation over. Another little nudge is what she needed. The reply. She got to her pages and pages of anger and sadness was thanks for the good times, but can you keep this a secret between us? I don't want to ruin my chances with anyone else. She's flush with anger now, just seething. She gathered her keys and headed out the door without even saying goodbye. I knew where she was going. I booted up her laptop and set it to reformat, deleting her dissertation and any notes pertaining to it before following her to campus. I parked a few lots over and rushed over to his office, where I find her screaming at him for giving her herpes. There's a lot of people there, professors, aides, students, other faculty. I'm dying. He is beyond embarrassed and confused as anything. She is ugly, crying in front of her peers. I'm in heaven. I didn't even care that people were going to think I had herpes till the fallout was apocalyptic in their departments. He lost his job due to code of conduct at the university. We got divorced the following year. The state law was that we had to be separated for 1 full year before being granted a divorce. I got to keep most of the assets, primarily savings and not a time, but I worked for it. She never finished her doctorate and went on to be a perpetually pregnant housewife that sells Herbalife on Facebook. And he teaches high school now. It took a few years for it to all unfold, but watching it was glorious. So my viewers and listeners, here we have it. This is the actual origin story of all those Facebook fans who are selling MLM scams. Our next Reddit post is from Isaiah Clark 7688. This isn't my story, but it comes from my dad and other family members who witnessed it. Background: this all went down in the late 1970s when my dad was 17. The area he grew up in was in the UK and was a stereotypical working-class town. The part of town my family lived in was run down, full of poor families, and had its fair share of crime. But it was close-knit and everyone knew everyone. This will be important later now. My dad wasn't the most well-behaved kid, and he had hated being at school. But aside from a speeding ticket, he had never been in trouble with the police. He was and still is a really talented musician and had a very active social life. For his 17th birthday, one of his friends had bought him a leather jacket with a very specific logo on it. We'll call this friend Dave for future reference. According to my dad, it was a rare and quite expensive motorcycle jacket. He was extremely happy that Dave got it for him. David bought himself the same jacket a while before, and it was a big surprise. My grandmother apparently joked that with the jackets on, they looked like twins, and she wasn't wrong. They had similar features, black hair, and were both well known for being kitted out in motorcycle gear. A few days after my dad's birthday, he was leaving work as a bartender in the town center at around 10 p.m. as he was getting close to where his bike was parked. A gang of 5 men approached him from behind. The last thing my dad remembers was being smacked over the head and passing out as he hit the floor. These men beat up my dad with bike chains and a crowbar, literally to within an inch of his life. Luckily, 2 bouncers from a nearby pub had heard the commotion and rushed to help. The men ran off. The bouncers called the cops and my dad was taken to a hospital. It turned out that Dave had quite a substantial gambling habit and owed a large amount of money to people who you really didn't want to owe money to. They had threatened Dave and told him that they would be looking for him to teach him a lesson. So Dave decided to set up my dad to take the beating instead of himself, or at least lessen his chances of taking it. He had bought my dad the same jacket because these guys knew that was what he wore when he rode. He then arranged for a guy he knew to find out when my dad left work and call up the loan sharks to let them know where Dave was. What a scumbag fag. The revenge. My grandfather and grandmother were obviously distraught about this whole thing. The first thought on my grandfather's mind was if my dad would survive. When that was answered, his second was how best to get revenge. Bit of background on my grandfather. He was a lifelong boxer and a career military man. He enlisted at the back end of World War II at 17, stayed in the forces through Korea, and then served in Malaya and Burma as a scout and sniper during the mid to late 1950s. He only reluctantly retired. Oh, I'm so excited for this story. He only reluctantly retired when my dad was little and worked as an engineer after his discharge. The guy was a certified tough cookie even into his 52nd, and although he wasn't the best husband or father at times, he could never stand by and watch his family get hurt. The first move my grandfather made was to call up every ex-service buddy, bouncer, pub, landlord, etc. that he knew, and even a few less than legit characters he knew from the pubs in my town. Word traveled fast, and my grandfather was well-liked and had a bit of a reputation. And so it wasn't long before he had the names and addresses of the 5 men who had attacked my dad. Apparently, these guys had been bragging about beating up a defenseless man from behind. These guys were career criminals with violent reputations. But my grandfather really didn't give a flip who or what they were. My grandfather then called up a few of the most dangerous, hardened guys he knew from the service. He explained to them what had happened, and they were all happy to help. One night the group kicked in the doors of each thug and beat them to a pulp, all 5 of them. They knew that if they hit one, the others would hear about it and run, so they hit all 5 of them in one night. My grandfather knew that no one would call the police in the area they lived in. Talking to the cops was a big no-no in that area back then, so there was little chance of being caught. All 5 guys ended up bloodied with broken bones, shattered teeth, and the requirement to be fed from a tube. By the end of the night, one of them had to be put into a medically induced coma. Of course, the police interviewed all of them in the hospital when they sufficiently recovered, but none of them talked, both out of fear of my grandfather and fear that they would be labeled as rats, and nothing came of it. But my grandfather wasn't done there. My grandfather used his connections in the clubs and bars to start spreading rumors about why they had been beaten up. Soon it had gotten around that these 5 guys had left up and had beaten up the wrong person. Not only that, but they had bragged about it and lied to whoever they worked for about it. Not only were they physically broken, but my grandfather ruined their credibility so that when they got out, no one criminal or otherwise wanted to be associated with them. Once this was all done, my grandfather turned his attention to Dave. He had specifically left Dave for last, knowing that he would soil himself knowing that my grandfather knew what he had done. My grandfather, however, was much more subtle in dealing with Dave, as he thought that a simple beating would be too good for him. He waited and asked around, and it turned out that Dave was not only a compulsive gambler, but also had recently turned into a heavy drug addict as well. My grandfather found out who he was buying drugs from when he would usually buy, and where he had a buddy of his follow Dave when he went to buy his stuff, follow him to where he was living and let my grandfather know. My grandfather then called in an anonymous tip that there was a huge drug deal going on at the address, and he thought he heard gunshots. He got 2 of his buddies to do the same. The police investigated, searched the house, and caught Dave red-handed with both loads of drugs in his home as well as counterfeit bills and a ton of other illegal stuff. Dave was charged, denied bail, and ended up pleading guilty to all the charges laid against him. My dad could never remember the exact sentence, but it was definitely heavy, at least 15 years. To add to that, Dave owed a lot of money to a lot of people, and let's just say his time in prison was made much worse by this fact. My dad never spoke to him again. His parents disowned him. His girlfriend dumped him. He struggled to get a job with his record, and when he got out, he had to move miles away as no one he knew what had anything to do with them. My dad eventually recovered from his injuries, although you can still see various scars on his body from the beating he took. My grandfather never told anyone what he had done until his dad asked him about it when he got really ill in the early 1990s. Dave's life was ruined, and out of the 5 who attacked my dad, 3 ended up in prison later in life and 2 ended up dead due to crime. My grandfather passed away in the late 1990s, and although my dad and him had their issues, it could never be said he didn't look out for him when he needed it. This is the joke that Grandpa is literally from the generation that took down Hitler. What do you think he's going to do to a moron with a gambling problem? That was our /nuclear revenge. Thanks for watching.